Okay, so very different presentations today. Mine is actually going to be wildly different as well as the other three. So that's good. Hopefully that'll have some retention in the room. I'm the Lebel in Lebel and Bouliane, a total mouthful, absolutely. We're a firm of, we're verging on 10 people. We've been around since 2010. And we have a different path to where we came from. So both Luke and I are graduates from the university, and I left the practice for many years, and I went and worked for big industries. So I went to work in manufacturing. I had owned a business that got bought and got bought again. And at some point, I was in a management team with 2,000 people reporting to me and the rest of my team in large-scale advanced manufacturing. So very different path. And in the meantime, Luke, and we were married at the time, still are, worked for Lebel Architects for 10 years. And during that time, he became a licensed architect and a design and project architect at Stephen Teples. Around 2010, we decided to start a firm because we also wanted to start a family, and I was traveling all over the world and I just couldn't do it anymore. I had also had the chance to do an MBA at Northwestern Kellogg School of Business, and I just felt I had a lot of tools to be able to help Luke start a design practice. Design had always been very close in my world because I worked mostly in innovation and project development. So we decided to start this in 2010, and Luke obviously found it as a single practitioner, and by 2013, I think, I came into the firm quite seriously, like on a pretty regular basis. And as of 2015, 2016, I've been a full-time member of the practice as the studio director. So this presentation is basically a discussion about how important it is to have clarity between the vision that you have as an architect and how you actually conduct your practice as a business and how you align that with the portfolio, so that in 10 years from now, as you take on jobs and as you take on commissions, you don't take things to make money or starve in order to get your practice, give your practice kind of the expression that it wants, and end up 10 years from now in a place where you had never intended to be and perhaps didn't want to end up in. And I think everyone here in their practice has a pretty clear mind about where they want to be. So Luke and I, when we started our practice, we had a sit down and we talked about what we wanted to take on as commissions and what we would not take on as commissions. And myself, with my own background, I didn't want to take on anything that lost money, and that was categorical. So we would have to make money on everything that we did. We were grown-ups, we wanted to start a family, and we had bills to pay. Luke had been very lucky at the very end of his career at Lebel Architects. He had taken a few projects with him, with Stephen's blessing, that were no longer a good fit for the office because Lebel Architects was growing so fast. And the Port Hope House was one of them. And so we discussed about what types of project we would want to do, and we realized that residential was one that was very valuable for our firm, that it brought a lot of value in terms of design expression and freedom, detailing, and those really close relationships that you have with clients over long periods of time. And of course, these clients are still very close to us, and we still do work in and around this property to help them develop their own vision. So this project is in Port Hope, and it has won an Award of Excellence with the OAA, and it was really co-authored between Steve and Luke, and it was finished in our firm at the beginning of our practice. And this is really, Luke coming from Sault Ste. Marie, his work or his design approach when it comes to residential work typically comes from landscape. So this is a house that emerges from the ground. So this is a planimetric model that you see, and it just basically comes out of the ground, and it over a peak, and it looks onto Lake Ontario and Port Hope. It's a very beautiful house, very wonderful clients. But this house in our practice allowed us to develop the technical capabilities to take on our first ever new build commission, which was the Relmar houses. The Relmar houses, we were very lucky. It was someone who had a son of similar age to Luke and I, who wanted to build his first new build as a builder, and so we kind of formed this dream team. Can't say we made money on this, but we didn't lose money on it. But we knew that this was very important. We knew that this house was going to set the tone for our practice on the residential side, and that the detailing and the technical capabilities of this house, and not to mention the story of it, was going to be fundamental in getting this work published. So the story around this house, of course, is that this is Toronto, and the houses are very introverted in Toronto, and so the metaphor of the geode and this kind of hard shell exterior with this light, bright interior, and light coming through and basically illuminating from the third story skylights all the way down. As you see, this is the ground story kitchen that's in the center of the house. So a very successful concept, learned a lot, and so did the client, so did the builder. But all in all, we were all in this together, and with a real deep respect for the economics of the project as well, and the fact that you are taking someone's, in some cases, life savings and converting it to a piece of architecture, and you have to be very respectful of that. So again, in the vein of residential work, this is one of our current projects, and this is a house on the bluffs. And to go back to Norm's comment, this took three people on this rendering or this model at the same time. We do some work in Revit, we do work in Rhino, we do work in 3D Studio Max, we do work in a bunch of things, and we're a little bit at our age kind of at the mercy of whoever's working for us in terms of what the software that they're used to, or even the language, or how the expression of the art, not necessarily the design, but the actual renderings. So there's a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes of us telling people, oh, more gray, it needs to look like the rest of the portfolio, it's going crazy. So this is the house here on the edge of the bluffs, and in this case, the metaphor for the house was the Canadian Shield and the kind of the glaciers pushing down on the Canadian Shield and creating what's called a dremlin, which is a series of kind of curvatures into the granite. And of course, as in most of our work, light comes in through this kind of concept of kind of eroding the building from the top, as though water had kind of penetrated through it, and that's how light penetrates through it. And this is the back of the house. This is under construction right now, and hopefully will be finished in the next couple of years. So it's not unlike renderings. It's not immediate gratification. So the third vein, the third aspect of our work that we had discussed at the beginning when we founded the firm was commercial work, and what would we take, and what would we do, and what would we not do. So the thing about taking on various types of commissions is that you take on a learning curve every time, and you kind of have to pick and choose what it is that you want to learn about, and do you really want to learn about something different every time you tackle a project, because that learning curve is in fact expending energy. It's energy you could be using to design, it's energy you could be using to go out for dinner or sleep in on a Saturday. Like it becomes very real when you have, like we have at any given time at least 15 to 20 projects in the office. So you know, you need to figure out pretty quickly what you want to be good at and what it is that you're going to be at the forefront of as well. So commercial work, Luke had actually brought with him from Teeple Architects had brought with him the client cassette, again with Stephen's blessing, and we did this as a joint venture with Stephen. So Luke was the project architect and the design architect, and Steve's office was providing the resources to really kind of push the project into its final, its completion, is 60,000 square feet of ad agency in Liberty Village for Cassette, which is now, for us, turned into, because they've been bought several times and agglomerated with other companies, it's turned into at least 5 or 6 projects and over $8 million in construction. So, you know, those relationships that you build at the very beginning with these clients, you know, Luke has worked with these guys for 15 years now in 3 different locations and in the city, and now over 5 buildings. They're really important. And not only are they our bread and butter, but they let us experiment. Now, there's a huge difference between this construction and residential construction. I would say this is probably, at the time, this was 5 times less per square foot than a new build residence, right? So there is a learning curve about what can you do, how can you give value to your clients with, you know, much lower budgets, especially in interiors that turn over. So if a house feels like it's forever, you know, some of these commercial interiors, when you work with ad agencies, they turn over in 5 to 8 years. If they're around in 10 years, they're kind of shabby. So you have to kind of, you know, go in and zhuzh a little bit, which is actually what we're doing right now with Cassette again. So luckily, that work brought us to do work with Ben Simon Byrne and One Method, another 60,000 square foot renovation in the CBC building. And I should mention that you'll see a little bit later in the presentation that we had done the redevelopment and the renovation for the Canadian Museum of Immigration in Halifax, which was technically a very difficult building to present. It was a historical monument, and it's on the Atlantic, and it had to be an airtight museum. So that was, you know, that in effect, with that information, we were able to convince this client that we could execute inside the CBC building. It's a very, very complex structure. In fact, we had to use the structural engineers for the CBC. We had to do facade remediation. Cutting through the slab was expensive and very difficult. And you'll see here that even the leasable area, this is the circulation through it, but it was very complicated and convoluted. We had to work around huge mechanical shafts. We had to work around various freight elevators. And this is right at the corner of John and Wellington, so it's a very prominent corner. Now, when we had done the work for Cassette, we had developed some, you know, if landscape was our thing in residential, in commercial, urban design is our approach. And I think that has a lot to do with the scale of interior design work that we do for commercial work, because 60,000 square feet, when you're given a huge shed that's got, you know, just a columnar structure, you have to have a method or some way of breaking that down. So our approach to this, our approach to this was really looking at how you circulate, how do you take clients to the very depths of a space, and how do you bring them to kind of all of these events, and how do you make these events happen? So, of course, these events won't happen unless the people are there to animate and activate those spaces, but the architecture is really the backbone of that, and the way that the areas are laid out. So this, I mean, you could see more on our website. I don't have many images, but this is a really, really successful project for us. The pictures don't do it justice. The vibe of the space when you walk in some of these spaces is absolutely incredible. And I'm not showing One Method right now, but that project, One Method, is what got us published in Interior Design magazine last year. It was the first time we were published in the States, and I think that it's also the project that caught the eye of Sidewalk Labs in Toronto. They were coming in from New York. One day we got a call from Google, and they said, hey, we're shortlisting architects. We've got this space on Lakeshore. We want it to be our community hub for our 80-acre development on the waterfront. Would you guys be interested? So we were super interested. And, you know, like every like everything that is just such a red, juicy apple, of course, like, well, it's not a competition, but we'd love to see your ideas, and we just, we really want to know what you would do. So this is the opening. This is the space. This is the large kind of exhibit space, and it's actually built, but it's not photographed. And these are the renderings. I'll show you here. These are the renderings that we sent to them in our initial proposal. We took their brief that they had presented to the City of Toronto in terms of what they wanted to explore and build on the waterfront, and we incorporated all of those ideas as a living laboratory in this building. So this is the exterior space approach, and this is kind of just the interior. Like most clients, especially I think when you get into tech, I'm not really sure how much things cost, like how physical things cost. So there was a huge disconnect between the actual budget and what they could do. So in the end, we were up against the city's best firms. And in the end, we were able to demonstrate that they could do something at a budget that was reasonable. We were able to talk about all of the shortcomings of the building in terms of, everything from zoning to, being able to get licenses for events and things like that. These were just practicalities that we had already encountered in many of our projects. So, talking about commercial projects, when we do commercial projects, we don't do restaurants. We don't do retail. Doesn't mean that we won't do it, but I bet you we'll partner on it if we do. Like, we know what we do. We do cultural spaces. We do them very, very well. We know open workspace environments inside out. This is also the type of work where I know Andrew was surprised to hear that Luke is speaking at the Architectural Conservancy in a couple of weeks, but we do a lot of adaptive reuse. A lot of these projects that we do are in heritage buildings, and we are very respectful of the fabric of those buildings, and which is why a lot of our work, like you saw in the CBC building or in Cassette, doesn't actually touch the structure. It's its own thing. And those urban design concepts that we lean on, they're really helpful for that. Because it allows the building to be kind of this world that we kind of build a city into. So this is one of our first really important institutional projects. This is the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21. To this day, we still are not sure how we got this project. We went in. I think we were very smart. We hired a local architect there that even had history with the museum. He had been, as a baby, he had come through Pier 21. The story was incredible, but he was well known in the community. We hired an architect in Toronto to work with us who had experience in managing so many diverse groups of stakeholders. This is only the second federal museum outside of Ottawa, so I won't say that there was a lot of scrutiny as much as there was a lot of hope that this museum would be very successful, and in fact it is very successful. Again, being very respectful, what you see there on the top left is the departure area for soldiers in World War II. That's where they left, and that's where they came back to. And it's also where immigrants came in. We brought in, working to bring in all these artifacts, working, of course, to make this really leaky pier building into like an actual museum building. In the end, we had multiple strategies, but one of the best strategies was to hermetically seal all of the artifacts that were of value inside their own boxes so that we had multiple layers of environmental control. A ton of lead abatement. This was a shack before. This is adjacent to Pier 21. So the work that was done on our part, although it wasn't necessarily sexy from a design standpoint, we learned so much from it that technically now, recently we had U of T call us and say, can you guys just please bid on this job because we hear you have a lot of great adaptive reuse experience. So we're very grateful for that. So we had decided that we were going to focus on commercial, creative commercial work, and in institutional, we decided we were going to focus on cultural institutional work. The cultural institutional work for us is like oxygen. There are many parts of cultural institutional work that are not that fun, you know, like commercial kitchens and whatnot. But the part that is working directly with the stakeholders who are absolute believers in the cause and have worked often for many, many years to fundraise for this building. So in this case, this is in Clearview. If you look on the left there, you'll see the shed building that this is attached to. This is the hockey arena. And this was their community center, was the hockey arena and an adjacent room. And it was the lifeblood of their community. They raised the funds through the Canada grants this past couple of years to be able to build an adjacent library. So we were very lucky to have been chosen. I think the team, the quality of the team, and the quality, they paid us actually, they paid 3 or 4 firms to develop concepts, and because they wanted to get it right. So again, not a huge budget per square foot, but this idea, of course, that, you know, there's winters like 50% of the year, at least, they're under snow. So this idea that the building would look great in the snow, that there would always be a ton of light. So, you know, in kind of like the most depressing, you know, moments of the year, you could go into this library and it could be somewhat of a refuge. There's a kind of a living room space with a big fireplace. So taking the idea of community and really bringing it up to a whole other level. And this is some of our current work right now at U of T. So this is actually a Saucier Perrot building that was finished in 2001, I think. Very, very nice building, great bones, concrete. And we were just brought in to basically bring that life, the work that we do in the commercial work, bring life, activate the space, and bring that into this space here. So this is under construction right now. I think it's actually the tender is closing in next week. So that's going to open next year. And that's it.